So our last bill is House File 1065, which is the education budget bill. Chair Marquardt, as a member of the Education Finance Committee, would you like to move that House File 1065 be recommended for placement on a general register?
Madam Chair, I'll make that motion.
All right, thank you, Chair Marquardt. So we have the bill before us. Chair Dabney, welcome back to the committee. Please tell us about your budget, and then we will move to the amendments.
All right, Madam Chair, thank you very much for that. It's good to be back. Madam Chair, members, the House Education Omnibus Bill is predicated on the belief that all children in Minnesota deserve access to a world-class education. We know we can do it. It aims to those goals by providing stable and predictable funding for our schools, a 2% increase in the general education formula each of the next 2 years, a down payment of a 0.5% increase each year of the following 2 years, and then indexing that formula to inflation in the ensuing years, providing school districts the security and predictability in funding so that they can then innovate and educate. It includes investments to reduce the cross subsidy in both special education and English language learners areas, 2 areas that we require but do not fully fund, and a cost challenge for many school districts. As your committee just visited on during Chair Pinto's bill, we not only extend the 4,000 voluntary pre-kindergarten slots that are scheduled to terminate, but we make them permanent so that the younger siblings of today's early child or preschool participants can have the same experience that their older siblings are having currently. We also increase funding for transportation for those sparse districts, those large geographic districts that are particularly challenged in transportation expenses, to help with them. We continue to focus on the equity work that we as a state need to do in the education area by making a historic commitment and investment in recruiting and retaining people of color and Indigenous people into our teaching ranks. This is a multifaceted approach. There's no one answer, there's a number of answers to everything from starting with high school students who think they might want to become teachers and providing them with opportunities for early experiences in the classroom and in education courses offered as dual enrollment, both college and high school credit, to grow your own programs so that those paraprofessionals, non-licensed people in schools, some of them without a college degree, can participate and grow your own programs that get them a 4-year baccalaureate degree and a teaching license so that the folks who know what it is to be in a classroom can be in that classroom. These grow your own programs often are disproportionately teacher candidates of color and bilingual candidates. So they're exactly the people we want to recruit into the profession. They also have higher retention rates because we recognize it's one thing to recruit and train a person of color or an Indigenous person to be a teacher. It's another thing to retain them once they're in the classroom. We get more for our state investment if we're able to retain these individuals. We also, in the work towards assuring that all students have access to a world-class education, we prioritize teacher and student needs in a number of different ways. Funding to increase the number of school support personnel, counselors, social workers, nurses, psychologists, folks like that in the schools. You may know, Madam Chair, that Minnesota ranks, I believe it's 48th in the nation in the percentage of, or the ratio of school counselors to students. Obviously, we need more access to school counselors for students, particularly if you think of those first generation potential college goers who may need a little bit more support in selecting and applying to schools and evaluating any financial aid proposal they may get back. Those school counselors can be key, those school social workers, in helping students with their social emotional needs throughout the day and throughout the school year. We continue that work by supporting what's called the multi-tiered systems of support It's a social emotional strategy that's research-based, that we know is effective, and importantly, we know also yields reduced referrals to special education for students. That's better for the student. It also saves money to the state and the local school district in the long run. We include some elements of Governor Walz's Due North plan that work on improving Indigenous education for all Minnesota students. We have a significant Indigenous population here in Minnesota. We have a unique responsibility and relationship with those individuals and those students, and we all benefit when we understand our state's history and those people's current experiences as part of our education. We have a number of other elements that I won't go into all of them, where we work to improve school climates so that they're more welcoming places for both students and teachers of color. And importantly, we work to build more bridges to post-secondary for students. We do that in part by focusing on some of those students who are often not present in our rigorous coursework, career technical education, AP courses, international baccalaureate, IB courses, focusing on making sure that the students in those courses look like the student body of the school that they're in. And ensuring, lastly, that adult learners who may have gotten off the train have access to general education, GED equivalency tests so that they can get reskilled or upskilled and be ready to come out of the pandemic. Madam Chair, you just adopted a new budget resolution that includes provision impacting the K-12 budget target. This bill proposes an investment of $724,975,000 to strengthen Minnesota's education system for all Minnesota students. I can go on, but I'm open to either dealing with the amendments or answering members' questions at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you, Vice Chair. That's why I have such a great Vice Chair, you guys. So as I was saying, before we move on to the A13 amendment that you guys could not hear me say, that I would need to hand over the gavel to my Vice Chair, as I must drop off. And so as I turn it over to Representative Hassan to introduce to move the A13 amendment, my Vice Chair will do the follow-up. Thank you. So Representative Hassan, would you like to move the A13 amendment for Chair Dabney?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Okay, I'm going to ask either Representative Hassan or Chair Dabney to explain the 813 amendment.
Sure, I can explain the first part of it, and then I'll let Chair Daphne to explain the second part. The first part of this amendment deals with appropriating funds to a very unique program that's called Black Men Teach Twin Cities Grant. This program is intends to attract and train more Black men to be teachers and to have more Black men teachers in classrooms. And I believe that it's working with, it has a partnership with 8 school districts. And the plan is to increase the number of Black male teachers to 20% of the teachers at each school site. And this is, it's my understanding that this is coming, this budget is coming from, we're subtracting this $750,000 from Grow Your Own program. So then we can still have a balanced budget. And I'll let Chair Daphne explain the rest of these amendments.
Thank you, Chair Dabney.
Thank you, Chair Olson. And first, thank you, Representative Hassan, for carrying this amendment. I'm excited by the Black Men Teach provision. Though that program focuses specifically on elementary schools, and I think there's some real value to having more male teachers in elementary schools, and obviously more Black men teaching is a benefit to all the students in those schools. My wife still talks that her 3rd and 4th grade teacher was a Black man, and the impact that that had on her life growing up here in Minneapolis. The second part of the program provides a $2.5 million aid program to encourage and recognize those school districts with larger numbers of students qualifying for free or reduced price lunch, to allow them to move to the CEP program, which makes federal funding supporting food programs for their students more available. And this helps to fill the gap so that more students are able to have healthy meals for both breakfast and lunch, if they desire, in their schools. We recognize that we're coming out of a pandemic, we hope, but that the impact of the pandemic has not been equal, and that many of our lower income families have been the hardest hit. This steps into that breach and supports those children and those families. And I ask for member support for both provisions of the bill, or excuse me, of the amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Dabney. Discussion to the A13 amendment. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Dabney, or to the author of the motion. As we've discussed before, there's over $2.5 billion of very discretionary federal funds that are available for this legislature to appropriate. And like the other finance committees, this money is being left unused. Given the crisis that we're facing, particularly in the Minneapolis and St. Paul areas, why are we not seeing more examples of programs like this that, instead of being artificially capped by the general fund, are making use of those $2.5 billion in resources? Even if we saw yesterday, the Agriculture Committee made those appropriations, they made them conditional on the federal side. Why is the Education Committee not doing that?
Chair Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Garofalo. Right now, the money that I'm concerned about that's being left unspent is the Senate not responding to our summer learning bill. We sent, as the House, on a bipartisan basis, an extensive summer learning bill to match up with the federal funds that the Senate had been holding. They've thankfully lifted their hold on that. But that's programming that the state can step into and support schools in making available. But there's a timeline. There's a timeliness. Schools and families have to be planning now for what summer looks like, but the Senate is not responding. I imagine you've got a better ability, Representative Garofalo, to phone a friend into the Senate Republican caucus than I do, and I would urge you to do that. As to the federal funds that are part of the American Rescue Plan that I believe are the ones you're referring to, we're still awaiting guidance from the federal government. They're working on that. We're hoping to have some soon, but absent guidance on the requirements around the spending of that money, I think it's premature to do that.
Madam
Representative Garofalo.
Madam Chair, Representative Dabney, why not pass it conditionally rather than just being? The clear language that's listed in that is highly discretionary. Why not just pass something that's conditional? So if the federal guidance comes up wrong, well, then at least the governor's got an excuse for telling you what to do, as opposed to him just ignoring you.
Chair Dabney.
Madam Chair, Representative Garofalo, one of the things that I've learned over the years is my first draft usually could use a little work and a good editor. And I'd rather that we didn't pass my first draft or the legislature's first draft to the governor's desk, but that we spent the time to do the due diligence to get it right.
Well, Madam Chair, my friend Representative Dabney, you're going to have a month to do that. I mean, you've got a month to tweak it and change it. Why let those funds sit unused?
Chair Dabney.
Madam Chair, Representative Garofalo, again, we don't have the guidance that we need from the federal government, so they're not able to be used at this point as it is. And I would rather that we have a robust public process that allows the public to weigh in before we pass legislation. Again, my first drafts, they often have misspellings and poor grammar, and the paragraphs aren't always worked out the way they should be. I'd like to get it right.
Well, Madam Chair, Representative Dabney, I think you can have a better answer than that, but that's okay. I would say that you should take a look at the language in the Agriculture Committee's omnibus bill, where they are making use of that. They're actually tapping in and making sure that that federal money can be used for this, and that's going to free up resources in the general fund. I don't think of Representative Sundin as being having a level of clairvoyance above you. I think you're both capable chairs who are intelligent. You should seek his guidance in how he's able to get those things, to use your language, drafted right the first way. But I do hope that as this conversation goes forward the rest of the session, I think you, more than some of the other chairs on your side of the aisle, understand the importance of not just punting on that $2.5 billion and letting the governor wave his magic wand. I hope that whether it's in public or it's in private, you are communicating to your caucus and your colleagues the importance of making actual decisions instead of just offering advice on how that money is appropriated. Thanks, Representative Dabney.
Further discussion to the A13 amendment. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. So to the next amendment on the agenda, Representative Miller, would you like to move the A10 amendment?
Thank you. Let me turn my video on so people can see that I'm actually here. Apologize for that. Thank you, Madam Chair. I do move my A10 amendment to be included in this omnibus bill, and I will be asking for a roll call. I do ask for a roll call.
Okay, Representative Miller has requested a roll call on the A10, and go ahead and describe your amendment, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, the amendment's pretty simple. The reason behind it will take just a couple moments to explain. So essentially what my amendment does is it requires, as everyone knows, the social studies standards curriculum standards are being worked through the process right now. They're about, depending on who's judging the score, they're about halfway to 3/4 of the way through that process. And I won't get into the long details of that process because the people that have interest in this probably know, and the rest probably don't want the time wasted in committee. But there's a process by which this about 40-person working group has been put together, and this is very standard. But the reason why I'm bringing this, and so basically what my amendment would do is anything that comes out of this, first it has to go to the ALJ, that's standard, but I want the legislature to approve this, which is not typical. But let me explain why. So in this last school year and last spring, by far the #1 issue that my schools have come to me with, by far, and I have 8 school districts in my rather large geographic area, so I've talked to quite a few of them. The biggest problem is the loss of students due to COVID. Now, we kind of quickly say things are due to COVID because it encompasses a lot of different things, and it can mean a lot of different things. But of course, COVID didn't necessarily cause the loss in students. What we had out here were many students who left. Their parents pulled them from the schools and either put them into an online school. I live here in Princebury Christian School. They had this school year, they had an incredible influx in students coming to the private school and other things. And it was fundamentally, maybe some slightly different reasons, but it was fundamentally they didn't believe that the public school system was serving them. And I want to be clear, it was not the local schools issues, it was the policies of MDE that was doing that. So as we move forward into this year, we have this social studies curriculum program that's going on. And I can tell you that just about anyone that I ask out here, mostly they come to me, but if I were to raise it in a room and say, do you know about the social studies standards? They would say yes. And they said, they cannot move forward. And people have been very educated on it because there's been lots of town halls, there's been meetings, there's been groups that have been talking about it. And I can tell you the people of my district and the people of this region are highly, highly concerned about the direction that this process is going. I think it's ironic that we're talking about social studies standards when what appears to be coming out of this working group is more social engineering standards. And so I have a level or a lack of trust in how this process is going. And I know under normal circumstances, that's just what we have to stick with. But I have been elected by people who have said they want me to try and do something to insert in this. And I am not coming and saying this is what you should be teaching with social studies. I think that it's more than reasonable for the legislature as a body, we all represent our people in our districts, to look at this and say, is this what we want to do for this curriculum moving forward? So I ask for the support of the members of this committee. I think this is a very strong statement that we have to say that we're going to get such important curriculum right on this. And that's what I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Miller. Chair Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Miller. I'm asked for a no vote on the Miller amendment. The state has history here. We've done this before, and it was a really bad idea. I'll try to be brief, but Governor Pawlenty's first education commissioner, Sherry Pearson Yecke, was an extremist both politically, outside the political mainstream, and outside the educational mainstream. She attempted to substitute educational-based social studies standards for her political agenda, creating a significant backlash. And at that time, the social studies standards, the state academic standards, did as Representative Miller envisions here. They came through the legislature. I have a clear memory of sitting in the Educational Policy Committee and offering amendments to the standards after they'd been developed by the department. So while Representative Miller says he's not saying now what we should be teaching in social studies, he sets up the process for legislators who may or may not have a background in social studies education, who may or may not understand where that profession is going, where the institutions of higher learning are researching and reflecting on the direction, where the content and questions in nationally referenced standardized tests like the ACT or the SAT are coming from, would be offering amendments and impacting students' ability to be prepared for both those standardized tests and higher education, and simply participation in citizenship. We looked in 2003, 2004 at what that meant to politicize the social studies standards, and decided on a bipartisan basis that the best approach was to take our students' learning out of the political arena and instead have a research-based process with the administrative law judge as the final arbiter, with a public process involved in numerous steps along the way. And we changed the process to what Representative Miller described earlier as the standard process. I would urge members to not make our students' social studies education subject to political whims, but instead leave it with a research-based professional process as this legislature established previously. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion to the A10 amendment? Okay, seeing no further discussion, Chair Miller renews his motion to adopt the A10 amendment.
I would like to have a couple of words, Madam Chair.
Oh, okay. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Chair Dabney, I believe you kind of made my point when you talked about radical agendas being infused in 2006. Anyone that's looked at what the proposals right now, and by the way, the proposals start here and they just narrow down. There isn't a great process that's available, but there's not a great process to say, we need to shift gears on this. This process, once it gets going, it's a truck going down the highway, and there might be a little bit of a veer to the left, veer to the right, or maybe a turnoff on this, but there's not significant changes. anyone that has seen the curriculum proposals for this year, they are radical left proposals that the people of my district don't support. And I dare say, I'm fairly confident saying a far majority of people in Minnesota don't support that. And you talk about not politicizing it, this 40-person group, when you investigate, I'm trying to keep out of the weeds here in this committee, but when you look at the makeup of this committee, it was a very highly politicized, put together working group. And if you talk about people having the expertise, we have Representative Erdahl, who's not in Ways and Means this year, so you can't ask him questions on this, but he has 35 years of social studies experience. By the way, he applied to be on that working group of over 40 people, and you have a state representative who's been in office for a long time, is a 35 or 30 plus year, I remember exactly how many, but 30 plus year social studies teacher. And sort of a little bit of trivia, I believe the only Republican endorsed by Education Minnesota. So he's a teacher's teacher, okay? So you can't say that there's no one qualified to talk about this in the legislature. And also for me to have an opinion of what I think my grandchildren should be learning, and to say, well, we need to have PhDs that tell us how to do that is just insulting. So I understand, Chair Davnie, what you're saying. We've got to do something here, folks. And this is my only method in the legislature that I can go by doing this, because I keep getting told, too bad, so sad, this is the way that it's going to be. And I go back to my original point. You are going to continue to lose students. I know people that say they are prepared to pull their students. Now, the Christian school in my town of Princeburg, they benefit greatly from that. That's not a problem. The online schooling systems, they benefit greatly. We need to prepare. I think we all agree what we need to prepare in our education system our children for adulthood. I don't see the current system going that way, or the current work that's being done going that way. And I have grave concerns about it, but I'm one person. I think that 67 senators, 134 state representatives should have input on this when in the conditions we see that things have steered greatly, of course. And by the way, and I'll finish with this, Chair Davnie, if you're saying that my proposal is wrong, we're in the same circumstances that you just described in 2006, and you said you worked to correct that with new policy in 4, I believe you said. It's got to be fixed again. Or, yeah, sorry, my years messed up, but you know what I mean. We've got to have this stuff. We got to get this stuff right. And right now I'm seeing no model by which we can get it right.
Representative
So please support my amendment.
Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for not getting my hand up before Representative Miller's closing remarks. To the Madam Chair and to the committee members, we've already politicized all of this, and what Representative Miller's amendment is just using a tool of the legislature to further bash on an already broken process. I mean, whoever's in charge is going to try to put in the standards that they would like. If you look, I was going to bring this up later in the bill, but we're already on it with the amendment. There's plenty of opportunities in this bill to change standards in education, ethnic studies, as well as how Indigenous education is done. I mean, there is no shortage of attempts to direct the instruction directly into our classrooms and how the schools do that. So the genie's already on the bottom bottle of that, and I think that's wrong. I wish we could come up with a better independent process, because I think we all understand there needs to be objectivity, or at least some depoliticized way to put content in front of our students and measure that for a quality education. And in fact, what we're forced to do is, because of all the pushing and pulling that goes on, we're forced into conversation and amendments like this. This is not the preferred way of which I would have done this, but I will concede this is one of the tools that we have. When you look through the bill itself and you see all the different academic directions that are trying to be pushed out there, and not even to bring up civics, as Representative Erdahl is doing, which is constitutionally mentioned, by the way, we can't claim that we're in a purist situation where the legislature is not going to be political about this. The one redeeming factor I see here, Representative Miller, is that you are asking the legislature to simply approve the standards so that the legislature has the final say on that. It is one more stopgap for, if you have, it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on. If you have an activist commissioner, which we've seen on both sides, every side, the other side is going to cry foul. So again, this isn't necessarily how I would have done this, but it is what's in front of us, and I would support the Miller amendment.
Thank you. Further discussion to the A10? All right. If not, Chair Miller renews his motion to adopt the A10, and there was a roll call requested, so Ms. Sparkman will take the roll.
Chair Moran excused. Vice Chair Olson?
No.
Olson, no. Representative Garofalo?
Yes.
Garofalo, aye. Representative Albright excused. Representative Becker-Finn excused. Representative Bernardi?
No.
Bernardi, no. Representative Eklund?
No.
Eklund, no. Representative Hansen? Representative Hansen?
No. No.
Hansen, no. Representative Hassan?
Hassan, no.
Hassan, no. Representative Hertas?
Hertas, yes.
Hertas, aye. Representative Hornstein?
No.
Hornstein, no. Representative Johnson?
Yes.
Johnson, aye. Representative Kresha?
Kresha, aye.
Kresha, aye. Representative Liebling?
No.
Liebling, no. Representative Lilly?
Lily, no.
Lilly, no. Representative Mariani?
Mariani, no.
Mariani, no. Representative Marquardt?
Marquardt, no.
Marquardt, no. Representative Miller?
Miller, aye.
Miller, aye. Representative Nash?
Nash, aye.
Nash, aye. Representative Nelson?
Nelson, no.
Nelson, no. Representative Noor?
No.
Noor, no. Representative O'Neill?
O'Neill, aye.
O'Neill, aye. Representative Pulowski?
Pulowski, no.
Pulowski, no. Representative Petersburg?
Petersburg, aye.
Petersburg, aye. Representative Pinto?
Pinto, no.
Pinto, no. Representative Schumacher?
Schumacher, aye.
Schumacher, aye. Representative Schultz?
Schultz, no.
Schultz, no. Representative Scott, excused. Representative Sundin?
No.
Sundin, no. 9 ayes, 16 nays.
On a motion of 9 ayes and 16 ayes, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. So members, are there questions or discussion to the bill as amended? Do I see any member discussion? Chair Dabney.
Madam Chair, members, thank you all very much.
Chair Dabney, I apologize. I do see Representative Kresha just got his hand up. So we'll give you the last word though, Chair Dabney. I'll come back to you. Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't realize we were going to move this quickly. It's like deja vu to your committee, Mr. Chair. We went so quickly to the final reading. Just a couple of comments. First of all, and I say this with all the sincerity, Chair Dabney, I've enjoyed working with you this year. The one thing where we have differences of opinions and we disagree on policy or perhaps places we put spending, there has always been a mutual respect and agreement. And in fact, you'll notice we've never ever made comments about your committee not getting equal time for people on the amendments. And we were always on time. I don't think there was one committee we went over. And that speaks to the fact that there was a nice collaborative back and forth and still respect for the institution and respect for debate. So with that, I appreciate that. And I think it gets us to a good conversations and sets the foundation. So thank you for that. On the bill itself, there's a tremendous amount of money out there. And we see some things on here, the 2 and 2 in the formula, the money for the special ed cross subsidy, all things that there's probably broad agreement on how we could get there. and even some of the earmarked funding, there are lots of programs that are good ideas. And there's a lot of money in this target, but when the joint target comes out, we'll see what actually shakes out. And I think that's where your more difficult task is going to be, is paring down to exactly what can be agreed upon. So I will just focus briefly on some of the policy provisions that I think are problematic and that will need to be reconciled, or probably will just get dropped as we get closer to an agreement. I think you're going to hear schools from around the state still calling out the imbalance of funding, especially when we get into the compensatory revenue concentration factor. By increasing that, an argument can be made that there will be more dollars flowing into the metro schools versus the out of states. I've heard it. It's a conversation we have continually, and I think that will continue to go through. Maybe there will be enough in the formula that schools won't actually look at that as closely as will be, but the fact of the matter is there still will be a concentration fact and an imbalance on how dollars may flow through the schools. So that's going to be a conversation. I don't know how that will get reconciled as we go to signature with the governor, but that I believe will probably be a conversation point. With all the federal dollars and all the money that we have out, we have a provision in here: the school boards can authorize to renew voter-approved referendum levies without an election. That is a problem. I mean, we hear schools and school boards saying, well, the counties and the cities get to go to the vote, or they get a raise without referendums. But the fact of the matter is they're also not held to the same funding that comes from the state. I mean, if we were to put schools and school boards on an LGA equivalent type of funding mechanism, I think they would cry foul pretty quickly. The fact of the matter is our schools are still part of our communities. They should be very integral to those communities. And I know it can be a challenge and an untenable, unfun to have to work with voters. We all as elected officials, I think there's times that we find the frustrations of that, but that's our job. And when you are a superintendent or you are a school board member, it is your job for community relations. That's your number one job. These voter referendums are 10 years and things change over 10 years. And I don't think it's ever a bad thing that school boards and superintendents are transparent and they work with their voters and they build support because that's what makes better communities. And just simply asking our voters or just telling our voters there's going to be an increase just because it may cost money or because it's a bit of an inconvenience, I don't think is a good barrier for or a good argument for creating a barrier to democracy. We hear all the time about how important elections are and that voice is important. I think that should carry all the way through. So I don't know why we would entertain that here at a time, again, where we have lots of money in amounts we haven't seen in a long time. Coming through the policy side of this, and Representative Miller, you brought up your amendment, which does touch this nerve, but inside this bill, there is lots of opportunity to direct from the legislature how standards will be taught. In Article, I apologize, I should have memorized, Article 2, one of the provisions there is that we direct the new social studies standards to include personal finance standards and benchmarks in government and citizenship in grades 11 and 12. So on one hand, an amendment was just defeated that would tell the legislature they can't approve those. On the other hand, in House File 1065, we are in fact directing what should be in those standards to some degree. This happens again with Indigenous education. And we had testimony in committee about how some of these cultural standards and curriculums could even flow into the homeschooling. And that's very problematic. I think we have to be very careful of that. And I don't think it's the best way to go about it. We get into the teacher section of the bill, Article 3. And again, I've already spoken against this, but I think that raising the fee from 57 to 87, and I hope I read that correctly, I think that's bad practice. I mean, when I read through the racial justice report, and I read this through, and of course, Chair Moran and I had a robust discussion on this. Any barrier that we can create for young men and women, any young men and women teaching, but particularly young men and women of color to get into the classroom is a problem. I think any barrier we put up at this point, when we don't have a pipeline of teachers out there now, is very problematic. The teachers of color amendment, I was glad to see that go on. That goes a long way towards this, and we should do more of those. But we can't be putting up barriers at the same time trying to talk about how we're taking those down just by establishing teachers of color goals. The other thing is we talk around LIFO around all the time, and I get it. Ed Minnesota is a big supporter of the LIFO. They never want to see that go away, but there's broad disagreement among communities of color and educators and other ones about the impact of LIFO and what it does to the young teachers and the teachers of quality. I mean, the fact of the matter is we need to remove the standard that your hire date is the first thing that establishes whether or not you should be around as an educator. In this bill, we have a policy provision here that I think is going to be interesting to see how this works out, but it allows the collective bargaining agreements with union consent to establish a select committee to consider exempting up to 5% of teachers from the seniority priority order. So the solution to this, rather than deal with the actual issue, is we're going to try to add a little bit more layer of bureaucracy. We're now going to create a select committee that I don't even believe has to be completely transparent on its decisions, and they can set aside 5% of the teachers from the seniority priority list that essentially are untouchable based on certain criteria. That to me harkens to the good old boys club and elitist groups that are making deals in the back room. And I think it's just right for lots of, it's just right for a lot of issues. And I think it takes it out of the public arena and the debate and the transparency of getting our good quality teachers the ability to, on their merits, work into the classroom, become effective teachers, and grow in their career. This is, I just have to call it for what it is. This is the union still trying to keep their thumb on the scale and decide who quality teachers are, and hoping they get it right based on diversity. I don't see, as I walk through this and I look at all the points in history where clandestine groups like this have been formed, I don't see any scenario where anybody ever says, thank goodness the secret society was involved and made their decisions because it's made things better. So I of course have a problem with that as well. Let's see, my last couple of notes, I would just say, and I brought these up in committee. I think we need to really look hard at how we're going to increase the pipeline for teachers. I understand why there's positions in here, and I understand why there's territories in here. Ed Minnesota is still staking their claim. I don't agree with that. I don't think it is good for the young teachers that we're trying to attract, but we're going to have that fight continually. And the last thing I would say, and I hope this isn't the case, we're fighting the lawsuit right now, the Guzman lawsuit, which argues that there's higher concentrations of disparity students and that needs to be broken up. I don't think it's anybody's intent, but I think the opportunity exists when you start to increase the compensatory revenues and you start to create a scenario where schools can concentrate students to get higher revenue. It takes a very strong moral fiber to resist that. Again, I don't think that's anybody's intent, but at the same time, in an era when school funding can be very, very contentious and difficult to fight for, people will sometimes suspend their gray areas for how they achieve their results. And I just think we have to watch that. Like I said, we already have a lawsuit that's doing that now, and in committee, one of the nonpartisan staff did in fact affirm that if you were to change the Constitution, a concentration of students with free and reduced, you could affect the funding. I hope that's not the case. I don't believe that's the intent at all, but we should acknowledge that that does exist. And so with that, Mr. Chair, thank you again for your bill. Thank you for the robust discussion. And my support for the bill hasn't changed from committee. I won't be voting for the bill.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion to the bill? Okay, so I will turn it over to Chair Dabney for the last word here before we go to our series of motions. So Chair Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Kresha, thank you for your kind words at the beginning of your presentation. And I think you know that it's a mutual appreciation. You've been good to work with this year as you were the previous biennium, and it helps the deliberations of the committee, and I appreciate that. I'm going to try to avoid, Madam Chair, going point by point and rebutting Representative Kresha's statements. I will say that the work to ensure that all Minnesota students have access to world-class education is going to take a combination of broad initiatives, such as 2% increase on the formula each of the next 2 years, provisions such as Representative Fraser's provision allowing school boards to continue excess levy referendums at the same level so that schools have consistent and reliable funding, as well as the work that we do in the out years to index the formula to inflation. You can't plan responsibly if you don't know that you'll have the revenues to support the initiatives that your community looks for. Our school boards are, of course, our elected bodies. We allow for local control in school board elections every 2 years. And they are best positioned to deal with some of those issues rather than the state. This bill does stand in sharp contrast to the Senate bill, which has a 0 and 0% increase on the funding formula the next 2 years. Imagine that. Yes, Representative Kresha referenced the federal funding that is coming forward. Representative Garofalo referenced it earlier, but members need to remember that's one-time money. That's going to create a potential crisis of funding cliff and going to restrain districts in their ability to establish programs that research shows could have a positive impact on student learning because they don't have reliable funding. That's our job. That's what the adults do, is we make sure that there's reliable funding so that our schools can do the work to make sure that all students have the opportunity to thrive. I believe that House File 1065 lays a groundwork for that. I believe we're at a pivotal moment in Minnesota's history, and particularly in its education area. And the combination of policy provisions from Chair Richardson's bill and the finance provisions that you find coupled together here provide a strong base for us to move forward. I ask for member support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Dabney, for being here today with the Ways and Means Committee and for your work on this bill. We appreciate it. So members, we will now have a series of motions and votes to merge these two bills and send them to the General Register using House File 1065 as the vehicle. So Chair Pinto, do you move the language contained in Articles 4 and 5 of House File 2230 as amended be consolidated into a single article and incorporated into the Education Omnibus Bill?
That is my motion, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Great, and we'll make sure everyone understands the motion, and if we have to have staff explain any of the pieces of the budgetary pieces, we'll do that as well. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. I will just reiterate my request that we get more kind of a walkthrough of how the targets and the funding is going to be split out with Representative Pinto's bill and this one. It's an interestingly, I was an administrator and I spent a lot of time with figures and data sheets and so forth. And it was amazing to me when I would present it to my church council, how often what I thought was absolutely clear was not to various people, because they'd come back with questions that was different than what I understood it. And so whereas I know that there's a spreadsheet and I know that we can read that, I think it's also important that we have somebody walk through that with us so that not only the written, but the verbal context indicates that. I don't have a problem with splitting it out or anything. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so if that's a possibility, that's my request. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Petersburg. Yes, we can certainly have staff do that. So as noted, members, the spreadsheet was attached to your packet that has been referenced a few times, but we will certainly have nonpartisan staff walk through it. So I believe Mr. Marks is available to do that, and then Mr. McCall has pulled the spreadsheet up here. So Mr. Marks.
Madam Chair, I would actually like to defer to fiscal analyst Emily Adrians, who helped prepare that early childhood spreadsheet.
Wonderful. Ms. Adrians, thanks. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. And Representative Petersburg, I think you raise a good point that the way that we, Mr. Berg and I put this spreadsheet together, it made a lot of sense to us, but I hope it makes sense to members as well. So if on the page that you're looking at, this is the education portion that will be to House File 1065. So it includes the accounts that would fall under the early education jurisdiction. You can see what would be in the base from lines 48 to line 62, and then the change items below that. So the total amount in terms of the amount of funding, so the column, it's kind of towards the right a little bit in the middle. So for fiscal year 22 and 23, under House File 2230, the base amount is the 340.871, and then that's just over almost $341 million in base funding for those programs. And then added to that below it would be the 48.3 million, and that total in the first biennium is just over $389 million. That would be the early childhood provisions that will be combined into the K-12 education finance bill. And my apologies for not having that be even clearer. I think that we can amend the spreadsheet. And so, and then for the Health and Human Services portion, Mr. McCall, if you would go to the previous page. So the base for the Health and Human Services is on line 17 for the first biennium. It's just under $325 million. And then that plus the change items, which are on line 28 that are total, that's the amount of $1.67 million. So that total is about $326.5 million. That amount then will be put into the Health and Human Services bills. I believe tomorrow those will be heard in Ways and Means.
Thank you, Ms. Adrians. That was very helpful. And so just to be clear again, what we're doing now is we're doing the Articles 4 and 5 today. And as mentioned, we will be doing the other portion with the Health and Human Services. So Representative Petersburg, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's clarifying. The question that I would just ask though is there any accounts in here which could be arguably either combined or similar enough to each other so that there could be some confusion as to what might get transferred from one bill to the other? So the question is there something, especially in the change items, in which maybe it's similar to what's going to the Health and Human Services versus education, where people may be confused? And if not, I think we're good. But I just want to make sure that there is no gray areas that would create some issue of interpretation later.
Thank you, Representative Petersburg. I can defer to Mr. Marks on that. I'll also say you'll notice when we make the motion at the very end, we're going to just be crystal clear on places where the education finance and the early childhood bill, we will have to clarify for staff some of that. But for your broader question, I will turn to Mr. Marks. Oh, you're on mute, Mr. Marks. Did we lose?
Sorry about that. I had to find the button. Madam Chair and Representative Petersburg, we originally took these accounts from Health and Human Services and from education in the MMB fund balance to create the accounts for early childhood. So the way MMB has them arranged, or the way the executive branch has them arranged, there are these discrete, or these that are Health and Human Services and these that are education. And so what we're doing now is basically putting them back into that structure. So I don't think there's I think it's fairly clear which goes where, because we're putting them, we're returning them to where they were in the MMB fund balance layout.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you for that clarification. I just want to make sure that when we're doing something that can be controversial and confusing, that we're all on the same page. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess just a editorial comment, members of the committee, just noting, I think it's very clear for what Mr. Marks explained about where the account's going all. I will note again that this is a particularly overlapping and confusing area, in that even before we got into this, you've got programs overseen in one department but funded out of another, et cetera. Again, there's a long history of this. I think it's very clear, and our fiscal staff is keeping an eye on it. But I guess I'll just put a little plug in for members, as long as Representative Petersburg's question has kind of pointed this, that there really is a need for governance reform and for consolidation of these accounts. And that's part of what the bill does, in fact, is asks the administration to look at early childhood governance. I think we're really good for what we're about to do now, but just appreciated Representative Petersburg shining a light on that, because I think there is kind of a deeper substantive issue here when it comes to this area. Well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. So in front of us, we have the Pinto motion to contain Articles 4 and 5 of House File 2230 as amended, be consolidated into a single article and incorporated into the Education Omnibus Bill. So the motion is before us. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay.
No.
The motion prevails. So Representative Hassan, do you move the language of House File 1065 as amended be incorporated into the Education Omnibus Bill as separate articles?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So the motion is before us. Any discussion to that motion? All right, seeing no discussion, all those in favor, aye.
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 All those opposed, no. The motion prevails. Members, the final motion will sound a little different than the previous days at the request of nonpartisan staff to correctly align similar appropriations in these two bills. So Chair Marquardt renews his motion that House File 1065 as amended be recommended to be placed on the general register, that the two appropriations for early childhood family education be combined into the single appropriation in the early education article, and that the two appropriations for the kindergarten readiness assessment be combined into a single appropriation in the early education article, and that nonpartisan staff be directed to make any technical or conforming corrections and amend the title.
Yeah, I know. She got,
So that is the Representative Marquardt.
One is 30.
So this will be a roll call. So does everyone understand that motion? Representative O'Neill.
Chair, I'm sorry, but Representative Marquardt keeps cutting in, and I literally heard about a third of what you were saying, and I don't think anybody else heard it either, because it was really distracting. I wonder if you could, sorry it's long, I wonder if you could repeat it, because it is a very different motion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Representative O'Neill, for that. Yes. So I will reread the Marquardt motion to renew House File 1065 as amended to be recommended for placement on the general register, that the two appropriations for early childhood family education be combined into a single appropriation in the early education article, that the two appropriations for the kindergarten readiness assessment be combined into a single appropriation in the early education article, and that nonpartisan staff be directed to make any technical or conforming corrections and amend the title. So is the motion Representative Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm following you, but I need to say it back in a way that's a little bit different. This is basically passing the education bill out of this committee. Am I hearing that right, or is that another vote coming up next?
So this is the last vote. We amended in the portions Articles 4 and 5 of Representative Pinto's bill into the Education Finance Bill. And so this is the final motion, which will be a roll call, which was
gotcha.
then. Yep. Okay, great. So
okay,
just to make sure, you're right, it's confusing. So we're going to make sure everybody understands what we're doing.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, thanks, Representative Miller. Any further clarifications on the motion in front of us? Okay, great. So if not, there is a roll call, and so Ms. Sparkman will take the roll.
Chair Moran.
Aye.
Moran, aye. Vice Chair Olson.
Aye.
Olson, aye. Representative Garofalo.
No.
Garofalo, no. Representative Albright, excused. Representative Becker-Finn, excused. Representative Bernardi.
Aye.
Bernardi, aye. Representative Eklund.
Aye.
Eklund, aye. Representative Hansen.
Aye.
Hansen, aye. Representative Hassan.
Hassan, aye.
Hassan, aye. Representative Hertaus. Representative Hertaus. Representative Hornstein.
Aye.
Hornstein, aye. Representative Johnson.
No.
Johnson, no. Representative Kresha.
No.
Kresha, no. Representative Liebling.
Aye.
Liebling, aye. Representative Lilly.
Lily, aye.
Lilly, aye. Representative Mariani.
Mariani, aye.
Mariani, aye. Representative Marquardt.
Marquardt, aye.
Marquardt, aye. Representative Miller.
Miller, no.
Miller, no. Representative Nash.
Nash, no.
Nash, no. Representative Nelson.
Nelson, aye.
Nelson, aye. Representative Noor.
No, aye.
Noor, aye. Representative O'Neill.
O'Neill, no.
O'Neill, no. Representative Pulowski.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye. Representative Petersburg.
Petersburg, no.
Petersburg, no. Representative Pinto.
Pinto, aye.
Pinto, aye. Representative Schumacher.
Schumacher, no.
Schumacher, no. Representative Schultz.
Schultz, aye.
Schultz, aye. Representative Scott, excused. Representative Sundin.
Aye.
Sundin, aye. Representative Hertaus. There are 17 ayes and 8 nays.
17 ayes and 8 nays, the motion prevails. House File 1065 as amended is recommended for placement on the general register, and nonpartisan staff are directed to combine the mentioned appropriations and make any technical corrections. Thank you, Chair Pinto and Chair Dabney. So
Thank you, Madam
members-
Chair and members.
Thank you.